Here's a quote-by-quote guide to the novel The Cone Gatherers by Robin Jenkins. 1. It was a good tree by the sea loch. The setting of The Cone Gatherers is important with regard to both time and place. In some ways, the forest is idyllic, like the Garden of Eden from the Bible, and it is to this side that we are first introduced in the opening line of the novel through the word choice of good. This is in stark contrast to the other, less pleasant side of the forest, depicting it as an intimidating place where Roderick experiences terror and feels cramped when he goes in search of the cone gatherers at one point. 2. The mansion behind its private fence of giant silver firs. The word choice of mansion has connotations of grandeur and wealth, as does the word silver, which symbolises money. The words private fence here emphasise the class divide between Lady Runcie Campbell, the aristocratic woman who lives in the mansion, and the humble cone gatherers Neil and Callum, who are not permitted near her residence. Neil resents the way in which the upper classes treat the lower classes, and this line early on in the novel introduces the theme of social class. Jenkins' choice of a Highland estate as a setting for the novel is particularly useful for exploring social hierarchies, as being far removed from the cities, the estate still has a very traditional class system in place. 3. Gazed at the great house with a calm yet bitter intentness and anticipation, as if he was waiting for it to change. Again, the words great house underline the size of the Runcie Campbell's family home, which contrasts dramatically with the rabbit hutch of a hut in which the cone gatherers are expected to live. The reference to Neil being bitter is an early indication that he's deeply unhappy with the social class system and that he resents the way in which he and his brother are treated on the estate. The word choice of anticipation here foreshadows the fact that by the end of the novel, Lady Runcie Campbell's attitude towards the class system will have changed. The end of the Second World War did bring social change, and Roderick's more enlightened attitude in the novel prepares the reader for this breaking down of the class system which is so keenly desired by Neil. 4. In it, he was as indigenous as squirrel or bird. Describing Callum as indigenous to his natural surroundings suggests that he is as native to this habitat as the wildlife that live in it. He belongs in the natural world. This establishes a strong connection with nature right from the start of the novel and explains why Callum is so protective of the rabbits in snares and why he flings himself on the deer in an attempt to save it during the traumatic deer drive in chapter 6, which is a major turning point in the novel. 5. Chaffinches fluttered round him. His sunburnt face was beautiful with trust. The fact that birds are unafraid of Callum and flutter around the young man suggests he is similar to St. Francis, the patron saint of the environment and animals, in that he is so harmless and innocent that the wild creatures trust him and know he poses no threat. This establishes Callum's bond with nature right from the outset and helps the reader appreciate his powerful connection with the natural world. 6. We're human beings just like them, Neil points out. And then later, the description of their hut, hardly bigger than a rabbit hutch. Neil is angry at the way in which upper-class Lady Runcie Campbell treats him and his brother. Although she has been raised as a Christian and knows that she should treat people equally, Lady Runcie Campbell's marriage into the aristocracy has blurred her values, and she is torn between treating the cone gatherers humanely on the one hand and not being seen to lower herself by being too kind to them on the other hand. The injustice of being made to live in a tiny hut fit for an animal causes Neil to resent the upper class even more, and it explains why he is loath to go and rescue Roderick unless she comes personally to ask him at the end of the novel. Unfortunately, this contributes towards Duror's rage, culminating in the gamekeeper murdering Callum. 7. Demoralised as always by hatred. The word choice of demoralised here to describe Callum suggests that the negative human emotion of hatred actually makes him feel despair and lose hope. When we encounter Duror for the first time in the novel, he is described as being in an icy sweat of hatred, and this highlights that the good and innocent Callum is going to be no match for his evil nemesis, Duror. 8. In an icy sweat of hatred, with his gun aimed at the feeble-minded hunchback. As we've just heard, the initial description of Duror portrays him in a very negative light. The metaphor of icy sweat of hatred conveys that the evil is emanating through the pores of his skin, just as sweat does, and this suggests that Duror is inherently evil. The fact that he has a gun aimed at Callum is shocking to the reader, as by this time we're aware that Callum is simple-minded. However, instead of showing compassion to Callum's plight, Duror actively wants to harm him. This suggests that the gamekeeper does not respond to suffering in the way that a normal human being might be expected to. 9. The noose of disgust and despair. The imagery here of a noose suggests that the despair and revulsion felt by Duror is so strong that it is actually throttling him, just as a hangman's rope chokes the person who is being put to death. The fact that his emotions are powerful enough to suffocate him in this way conveys how strong his aggression and hatred are, and this makes the reader feel increasingly uneasy about Duror's state of mind and concerned about what he might do next. 10. Repelled by anything living that had an imperfection or deformity or lack. In the scene earlier in the novel, when Duror is pointing a gun at Callum, it's clear that he dislikes the dwarf, as he thinks of them, intensely. And we now discover that Duror has always been repulsed by any living creature that is deformed. A more normal human reaction would be to feel pity and sympathy for the deformed creature, and Duror's lack of compassion to his fellow humans is alarming, especially when we're told that he approves of Hitler's final solution in the Second World War. 11. These two subhumans. Duror considers the cone gatherers to be so low in the human pecking order or hierarchy that they don't even count as human beings. This again clearly indicates that he is a deeply unsympathetic individual, and worse still, that he is descending steadily into evil. If he does not consider the cone gatherers even to be human, what might he do to them? This question makes the reader feel increasingly uneasy and continues to build suspense as the novel progresses. 12. God knew how many inhibitions, repressions and complexes were twisting and coiling there like the snakes of damnation. The point of view or perspective from which the action is viewed changes throughout the novel. At some points we're seeing things from Neil's perspective, at other times from Callum's, Duror's, Lady Runcie Campbell's or Roderick's. The above lines describe the thoughts going through Dr. Matheson's mind when he is speaking to the steadily unravelling Duror. The doctor is middle class and educated, and his opinion counts. The symbolism of snakes in his evaluation of Duror's state of mind at this point in the story provokes connotations of the evil biblical serpent from the Garden of Eden. And the words twisting and coiling suggest that insanity is starting to corrupt Duror's mind, making the reader acutely aware that the gamekeeper is potentially evil and dangerous. 13. A struggle between her Christian sympathy for the weak-minded hunchback and her pride as a patrician. The Second World War may be raging far from the Highland estate where Lady Runcie Campbell and Roderick live, but she is unable to escape conflict completely, given that she herself is facing significant inner personal conflict. Raised by her father, a judge, to be a good Christian who treats people equally, she has now married into the aristocracy, and her position as the wife of Sir Colin, who's away fighting in the war, means that she has to behave as a noblewoman and to treat those of the lower class as her social inferiors. This dichotomy does prove difficult, but Lady Runcie Campbell is revealed as weak and allows herself to be influenced by the evil Duror into behaving badly towards the cone gatherers. They're housed in a tiny hut, forced to take part in the deer drive, thrown out of the beach hut during the storm, and generally treated worse than the Runcie Campbell's dogs. 14. It astonished Duror that she, so genuinely good, should be helping him in his plan of evil. When in Chapter 4, Duror succeeds in persuading Lady Runcie Campbell to force the cone gatherers to act as beaters in the deer drive, despite her initial reservations, he can hardly believe how easy it has been to manipulate this beautiful Christian woman, whom he admires and knows to be a good person at heart, into doing what he wishes. The phrase plan of evil highlights that he knows precisely the effect that taking part in the deer drive will have on Callum, and he thus abuses his position as advisor to Lady Runcie Campbell on shooting estate matters to torture Callum by forcing him to be part of an event that's guaranteed to traumatise the gentle cone gatherer. The juxtaposition of good and evil in these lines emphasises one of the main themes of the novel, which is the battle between good and evil. 15. He was like a tree, still showing green leaves, but underground death was creeping along the roots. Imagery is used frequently in the novel, and the imagery of trees is particularly effective. This simile compares Duror to a growing tree, and just as a tree can look healthy on the outside and have foliage, yet still their hidden roots can be diseased, so too from the outside Duror looks completely normal, masking the reality that he is becoming increasingly evil as the novel progresses. The fact that it isn't possible to see this process makes him all the more dangerous. 16. Screaming in sympathy, with reference to Callum. Berserk joy, cut its throat savagely, in reference to Duror. This incident at the end of the deer drive marks an important turning point in the novel, which foreshadows the tragedy that will occur at the climax of the story. The battle between good, as epitomised by Callum, and evil, as epitomised by Duror, is depicted clearly at this point in the novel, when Callum's desperate attempts to protect the hunted deer are thwarted by Duror's violent slaughter of the innocent animal. The descriptive language is very evocative here, and the sibilance of the words screaming in sympathy adds to the portrayal of Callum's despair, while the word choice of berserk hints that Duror has lost control completely, and the word savagely conveys clearly the cruelty of the act of killing the defenceless deer. Worse still, it appears afterwards that he might have been hallucinating that he was killing his obese wife Peggy. 17. We didn't treat them fairly. Lady Runcie Campbell's son Roderick may be a slightly naive teenager, but he knows injustice when he sees it, and he recognises that the way his mother and Duror treat the cone gatherers is neither morally defensible nor acceptable. He stands up for the cone gatherers, admiring their agility, and he is brave enough to point out to his mother that she's not being fair to them. And he's right. She fails to give them a lift in her car, and she throws them out of the beach hut after the young men take shelter there in the storm. The fact that Roderick is the next generation of the aristocracy, and that he is the one who sees the unfairness and injustice of the class system and acts as Lady Runcie Campbell's conscience in the story, gives the reader hope that the unfairness of the social divide might be addressed in the future. 18. He felt in a mood for murder, rape, or suicide. This description of Duror is as alarming as it is prophetic, and unfortunately all three of these occur in some way during the novel, with Duror murdering Callum, committing a sexual act on the doll, and eventually killing himself after shooting Callum. This short yet shocking line highlights the evil that is growing in Duror and foreshadows these future events in the novel. 19. The struggle between good and evil never rested. Good did not always win. Roderick has been well mentored by his maternal grandfather, the judge, and he understands that the battle between good and evil in the world is relentless. He also appreciates that unfortunately evil sometimes triumphs over good. This message foreshadows and is reinforced by the tragedy at the end of the novel, when Duror, representing evil, kills Callum, who represents good. 20. Her voice was far more appalling to the two men than any thunder. For God's sake, get out! It should shock the reader that Lady Runcie Campbell's voice is perceived by the two men as appalling. This is a strong word and suggests not only that she is furious, but also that they are frightened by her. This, together with the fact that the writer uses a powerful simile comparing her voice to the volume of thunder, indicates how angry the aristocrat is to find the young men in her beach hut, despite the fact that they are seeking shelter from a storm and not doing any harm. Her perspective is that the lower classes have no right to be in her private property, and she is unmoved by their plight. It is ironic that she, as a Christian, uses God's name while ordering the cone gatherers out into the storm. 21. This sinister transformation in Duror. The gamekeeper was again unkempt. The word choice of sinister to describe the change taking place in Duror suggests that the change is threatening and disturbing, which hints that he is becoming more evil. At the start of the novel, the gamekeeper takes good care of his appearance and turnout, but the word unkempt now suggests that he is dishevelled. The reader suspects that this deterioration in his external appearance mirrors the decline of his mental health, which once again makes us worry about the safety of the cone gatherers. 22. She has to be fed. All the descriptions we're given of Duror's wife Peggy in the novel suggest that she is in a very poor physical condition. She is portrayed as obese and physically repulsive, as highlighted by the description of her wobbling masses of pallid fat, which must be difficult for Duror to tolerate, given that we know he struggles to deal with any type of deformity or flaw. So incapacitated is Peggy by her hysteria after the storm that she is inevitably trembling so much she cannot feed herself. Despite his evil, it is tempting to feel some sympathy for Duror with regard to his home situation. 23. Macabre gestures of supplication. The murder of Callum at the end of the Cone Gatherers shares similarities with the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Callum's corpse is described as dangling from the tree after Duror shoots him, just as Jesus hung from the cross, with the word choice of supplication suggesting he is appealing for mercy. Meanwhile, the word macabre suggests that the scene is frightening and gruesome, highlighting how terrible it is when evil overcomes good. 24. From his bag dropped a cone and then another. Despite the tragic outcome of the battle between good and evil, which results in the death of first Callum and then Duror, the final scene of the novel does hint at hope for the future. From the bag hanging around Callum's dead body, cones begin to drop. These cones contain seeds which symbolise the chance of a new life. Just as the new forests will rise up from such seeds to replace the trees felled for the war effort, so too a new social system may be born, and the inequalities between the classes reduced. 25. As she wept, pity and purified hope and joy welled up in her heart. Having been raised as a Christian, Lady Runcie Campbell should have known better than to treat the cone gatherers in the inhumane way she did. However, the final scene of the novel, with Lady Runcie Campbell down on her knees at the foot of the tree, Callum's dead body hanging above her, suggests that the anachronistic social order, harder to defend after a war that had seen people from all classes fighting side by side, would be changed in future. Just as Christians believe that Jesus was crucified and died so that others might be saved, so Callum's death and Lady Runcie Campbell's reaction to it indicate that the days of the hierarchical class system are numbered, and that Lady Runcie Campbell has understood the error of her ways. In other videos on the Cone Gatherers, we look at an overview of the novel and some key themes for the 10-mark questions and essays. See you next time. If you found this or any of our other videos useful, it would be great if you could subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks for your support.